A house divided. Several times during the 1800s, as the nation grew and new states were admitted to the Union, it seemed as though the issue of slavery would cause the United States to be split in two. Many people thought that slavery is wrong, that no person should be able to own another. Many others thought that slavery is not wrong and that the government in Washington, D.C. should not try to tell the states what to do. After all, they argued, nowhere in the Constitution did the Founding Fathers say that slavery is wrong and should be ended or abolished. The states in the South relied on slaves to grow and gather their valuable cotton crops. They were eager to continue slavery. But in the industrial North, where there were no slaves, a movement was growing to abolish slavery everywhere in the United States. In 1858, an Illinois lawyer who had served in Congress was nominated by the Republican Party for a seat in the United States Senate. His name was Abraham Lincoln. He had helped organize the Republican Party 2 years earlier. In the summer of 1858, Lincoln campaigned against a great Illinois politician named Stephen A. Douglas. Even though Douglas won the election, Lincoln impressed many people across the country with his sharp intelligence and wonderful speech-making. Above all, people remembered that Lincoln thought slavery to be a great wrong. He also said that the United States could not remain half free and half slave. Quoting from the Bible, Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Eventually, the Union would have to permit slavery everywhere, or it would have to forbid it everywhere. In 1860, the Republican Party nominated Lincoln as their candidate for the presidency. The Democratic Party nominated Lincoln's old opponent, Stephen Douglas. Even though Lincoln did not think the federal government should interfere with slavery where it already existed, he thought it should not be permitted in new states or territories. This angered many Southerners who believed that Lincoln really wanted to abolish slavery everywhere. Many Southern politicians swore that if Lincoln were elected president, their states would vote to secede or leave the Union. On November 6, 1860, Lincoln was elected, soundly defeating Stephen A. Douglas and 2 other candidates. When Lincoln took the oath of office as President of the United States on March 4, 1861, 7 Southern states, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, had already decided to secede from the Union. Delegates from the seceding states had met in Montgomery, Alabama, and had voted to form a new nation, the Confederate States of America. The delegates elected Jefferson Davis, a congressman from Mississippi, to be president of the Confederacy. Davis had often defended the rights of states to run their own affairs, especially in the matter of slavery. Soon, Confederate soldiers and officials began taking over federal forts and arsenals and forcing the Union troops to leave. Lincoln tried not to do anything that would anger the Southerners, but he was determined to hold on to the Union forts and supply the troops defending them. He did not want to start a bloody civil war, but he had sworn to keep the Union together. Early in the morning of April 12, 1861, Confederate forces in Charleston, South Carolina, opened fire on Fort Sumter, the Union fort in Charleston Harbor. The Confederates had learned that a Union ship was on its way to the fort. They thought the ship was bringing more troops and stocks of ammunition, and they wanted to capture the fort before the ship could arrive. In fact, the ship was only carrying food and supplies. The next day, after 34 hours of battle, the commander of the fort surrendered. The Civil War had begun. President Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteer troops to put down the rebellion of the Southern states. He also ordered the United States Navy to blockade the Confederate ports. These actions caused 4 more states, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, to join the Confederacy. When the citizens of Charleston had seen the American flag taken down at Fort Sumter and the white flag of surrender go up, they had joined the Confederate troops and cheered happily. They did not know that this tiny Confederate victory would bring 4 years of bloody, brutal war, and that more than 600,000 Americans would die. At the beginning of the war, the Confederacy won many important battles. The Union Army had more troops, guns, and supplies, but the Confederate Army had better generals. As the war continued, one Confederate general, Robert E. Lee, rose to become the greatest general in the Confederate Army. Many times, Lee's brilliant strategies helped the Confederate Army to beat larger and better prepared Union forces. Lee's best general was a cavalry officer named Thomas Jonathan Jackson. He was called Stonewall Jackson because once, in a battle, he had stood his ground on the battlefield like a stone wall, paying scarce notice to the bullets whizzing all around him. Jackson could move his troops great distances in very little time, and his troops fought like tigers. Lee could always rely on Stonewall Jackson, and the two generals gave the South some great victories. But in May of 1863, at the great and terrible Battle of Chancellorsville, Stonewall Jackson was accidentally shot by his own troops. He died 8 days later. When Lee heard of Jackson's death, he said, "I feel as though I have lost my right arm." Lee had other good generals, but he was never able to find anyone who could take Jackson's place. And time was working against the Confederacy. Every day the Union Army received more troops and weapons, and every day the Confederate Army became smaller and weaker. The Union's naval blockade was slowly starving the Confederacy. On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Declaration, which said that all the slaves in territories held by the Confederacy were freed. But Lincoln knew if the proclamation were to mean anything, the Confederacy had to be defeated. Fortunately for the Union, Lincoln had found his own great general, Ulysses S. Grant. Grant knew that the Union had more of everything than the South, so he planned to beat Lee by wearing the Confederate Army down. Grant forced the Confederates to fight and tried to keep them tied down and unable to move. His strategy worked. In the spring of 1865, Grant trapped Lee's army in Virginia near the little town of Appomattox. On April 9, 1865, Lee surrendered his army to Grant. The Civil War was over. Soon slavery was outlawed, and the job of rebuilding the nation was begun. But Abraham Lincoln was not among the rebuilders. On April 14, 1865, he had been shot while watching a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Americans everywhere mourned the death of the president who had saved the Union.